The nights in camp carried a heaviness that never fully lifted. The desert air cooled after dusk, but the ground stayed warm, pressing its heat into the canvas walls of our tents. I lay awake most evenings, listening to the distant shuffle of boots, the occasional metallic clang of equipment, and the restless breathing of soldiers who had collapsed into shallow sleep after another punishing day. For most of them, exhaustion was enough to guarantee rest. For me, silence had the opposite effect. It sharpened every thought that my name is Daniel Brooks, 24 years old, a year into service. I had entered the military believing discipline would strip life down to its clearest parts, rules, ranks, routines. In many ways, it had. Days blurred together with drills, patrols, and endless briefings. Yet under the orderliness ran something unpredictable, something I hadn't expected. The mess of human connection. At the center of that confusion was Captain Michael Hayes. He was 36, a man whose reputation stretched further than the perimeter fences. Everyone admired him, not only for his commanding presence but for the way he carried it lightly. He was sharp without cruelty, demanding without arrogance. Even in silence, his authority was felt, a weight that drew attention the way gravity anchors planets. From the first week, I noticed how he moved through camp like someone who had memorized every shadow and sound. His voice during drills cut across the open fields, firm yet measured. To us, he was both leader and safeguard. To me, he was more than that, though I couldn't admit it aloud, not even to myself. Our interactions were, at least on the surface, nothing extraordinary. He'd check my posture during inspections, adjust the angle of my rifle, or drop a brief word of encouragement after long marches. Yet each moment carried an undertone, as though a current ran beneath ordinary gestures. Once, after a grueling exercise, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Good work, Brooks. You're steadier than most realize." His palm lingered a heartbeat too long, or maybe I only imagined it did. Either way, that small detail replayed in my mind long after lights out. That I knew he was married. Everyone did. He spoke of his wife, Emily, occasionally, always respectfully, as if her name alone grounded him. That fact should have built a wall in my thoughts. Instead, it deepened the contradiction. Admiration tangled with guilt, curiosity with restraint. The more I tried to ignore it, the sharper it grew, like an itch just beyond reach. At night, when the tent lanterns dimmed and voices outside dwindled, I caught myself replaying his expressions, the steady calm in his eyes, the rare smile that broke through his professional exterior. In daylight, it was easy to dismiss such thoughts as illusions formed by fatigue. But in darkness, they pressed close. The camp itself offered little distraction. Days were designed to strip individuality down to utility, but attraction doesn't vanish under orders. I carried it quietly, aware of its danger. He was not only my superior but someone bound by vows I had no right to test. Yet every glance, every word between us, seemed to carve out a hidden space where boundaries blurred. There was a moment, near the end of a long inspection, when our eyes met in the thin light of dusk. He paused, only for a second, as though something unspoken hovered between us. Then he turned sharply and addressed another soldier, leaving me uncertain whether I had imagined the entire exchange. Still, my pulse betrayed me that I told myself it was nothing, just the mind's way of filling silence with fantasies. But denial has a fragile shell, and cracks had already begun to form. In the quiet heat of the tent, with the desert stretching endlessly beyond the camp, the thought returned again and again, what if that look had meant more than I dared to believe? By the time sleep finally reached me, the image of Captain Hayes lingered at the edge of my thoughts. His presence was steady, his distance unshakable, yet I sensed a fault line beneath the surface, a place where control could give way. I did not know it then, but that fault line was already shifting, waiting for the night it would break open. The night it happened, camp was quieter than usual. Training had pushed everyone to their limits, and exhaustion had finally drowned out the usual whispers and restless movements. I lay in my cot, eyes tracing the faint patterns the lantern light made against the tent's fabric. Sleep refused to come, though my body begged for it. Thoughts circled the same orbit, Captain Hayes, his steady presence, the questions I dared not ask myself. The zipper at the entrance stirred suddenly. I sat up, instinct tightening my muscles, prepared for an order or alarm. Instead, a silhouette crouched through the narrow flap. My breath stalled when I recognized him. Captain Hayes moved carefully, closing the tent behind him, as though he had done this kind of sneaking before. "Brooks," he whispered, his tone softer than I had ever heard it. "You awake?" I managed a nod, words caught somewhere in my throat. He straightened slowly, his figure outlined in muted light. Seeing him here, stripped of command, unsettled me more than any battlefield could. "I couldn't sleep," he continued, lowering himself onto the empty crate beside my cot. "Mind if I sit a while?" The tent seemed to shrink around us. I nodded again, unsure if I was granting permission or surrendering to inevitability. His eyes held something unguarded, something that did not belong to the man who barked commands at sunrise. That he spoke first about the day, about drills, about the younger recruits who struggled. His words were measured, but his voice betrayed fatigue. Then, without warning, he shifted. "Do you ever feel," he asked, his gaze fixed on the ground, "that you've built a life so carefully, only to find cracks in the foundation?" I swallowed hard. The question didn't need an answer, it was a confession disguised as conversation. Silence stretched between us, heavy, waiting. "I shouldn't be here," he said, finally meeting my eyes. His jaw tightened, as though discipline wrestled with desire inside him. "But there's something about you, Brooks. Something I can't ignore." The word sent a shock through me, both terrifying and electrifying. Every glance, every subtle moment I had second-guessed, suddenly sharpened into clarity. "Sir," I began, instinctively reaching for distance, but he lifted a hand, halting me. "No ranks right now," he murmured. "Just Michael." Hearing his first name spoken aloud between us felt forbidden, like stepping over a line I had only ever imagined. My pulse thundered in my ears. He shifted closer, the faint scent of sweat and desert air clinging to him. His hand hovered in hesitation before brushing lightly against mine. Every rule I had lived by screamed to pull away, but my body betrayed me. I stayed still, trembling under the weight of his touch. His eyes searched mine, asking a question he dared not voice. I answered by not moving, by allowing the space between us to dissolve. The kiss was not rushed. It was tentative, cautious, as though both of us feared the world might collapse if we pressed too hard. Yet within that restraint burned something undeniable. The warmth of his mouth, the certainty of his choice in that moment, unraveled the distance we had fought to maintain. When it broke, silence returned heavier than before. He leaned back slightly, his breathing uneven. "This is wrong," he said, voice roughened by guilt. "I know," I whispered. But even as I spoke, I knew neither of us regretted it. The tense walls seemed to hold our secret, trapping it between the heat of our bodies and the cool night air that we sat side by side in the aftermath, not touching, not speaking. The stillness pressed down on us, carrying both comfort and shame. Outside, the camp slumbered, unaware that a line had been crossed, that loyalty had fractured in the shadows. When he finally stood to leave, his expression was unreadable. "Get some rest, Brooks," he said, his voice slipping back toward formality. Yet the use of my surname couldn't erase the intimacy we had just shared. The flap closed behind him, leaving me alone with pounding thoughts. My cot felt unchanged beneath me, but everything else had shifted irreversibly. The silence of the night no longer carried emptiness, it carried a secret, one that neither of us could take back, and as I lay staring into the dark, one truth settled deep inside me: this was only the beginning. Morning broke with its usual efficiency, sunlight pouring over the camp, whistles snapping us into formation, and the unrelenting rhythm of drills. Yet for me, everything felt misaligned. My body moved through familiar motions, but my mind replayed the night in relentless detail. Every word, every glance, every touch from Captain Hayes lingered like a shadow stitched to my skin. When he appeared on the training field, uniform pressed, voice cutting crisp through the air, no trace of vulnerability showed. He was once again the captain, the man everyone respected, the leader who demanded precision. To the others, nothing seemed different. But when his eyes flicked toward me, even for the briefest instant, I knew he remembered as vividly as I did. That hidden recognition lodged between us, invisible to the rest of the company, that I spent the day locked between two selves, the soldier executing commands and the man haunted by what had happened in the tent. Part of me ached with exhilaration, a pulse of forbidden closeness I had never imagined possible. Another part recoiled under the weight of betrayal, not of Emily Hayes, though she deserved fidelity, but of my own principles. I had sworn discipline, order, and integrity, yet in one night, desire had loosened all those knots. Later, during rations, I caught him watching me from across the mess. It wasn't long, just a flicker of a moment, but his expression carried a storm, longing mixed with warning. He looked away sharply, as though he could will the truth back into secrecy. I forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted of iron. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he found me near the water station. No one else lingered there. His voice was low, clipped. "About last night, it cannot happen again." The firmness of his tone stung more than I expected. I nodded, though disappointment gnawed at me. "I understand, sir." He hesitated, eyes narrowing as if measuring my sincerity. Then, softer, "Daniel." Hearing my first name carried more weight than his entire speech. I crossed a line. "I have a wife. A command. You have a career ahead of you. If anyone knew," he broke off, the sentence unfinished. "It's danger obvious." "I won't tell anyone," I said quickly. My chest tightened at how desperate I sounded. His hand flexed at his side, as though fighting the impulse to reach for me again. Instead, he straightened, armor of authority sliding back into place. "Good. Keep it that way." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me with words unsaid, emotions unresolved. That night, lying on my cot, the silence of the tent pressed heavier than ever. The secret between us had altered more than the present, it had carved a scar across whatever future lay ahead. I could still feel the warmth of his mouth, the hesitation of his touch, yet now it came paired with the certainty of distance. We had breached a boundary, and now we were condemned to live with it unspoken. In the days that followed, our rhythm resumed. To others, nothing had shifted. Captain Hayes remained the same resolute figure. I remained another soldier among many. But beneath the surface, every command, every accidental brush of shoulders, every stolen glance carried a charge we both refused to acknowledge aloud. And yet, in private moments, guilt clawed at me. Emily Hayes's absence became a ghost at the edge of my thoughts. I imagined her waiting letters, her trust, her belief that her husband's vows held firm even across miles of desert. What had happened in my tent betrayed more than just military protocol, it betrayed her faith in him. Still, denial was impossible. What we shared, however fleeting, had been real. It had not been an illusion born of fatigue or loneliness. It was desire breaking through restraint, a connection neither of us planned but both of us felt. That I knew no one would ever learn the truth. The night would stay locked in silence, a secret folded into the fabric of memory. But secrecy does not erase meaning. If anything, it deepens it, binding it tighter because it cannot breathe in the open. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought pressed hardest of all: some lines, once crossed, never truly close again. And though we might walk forward as if nothing had happened, the weight of that night in the tent would follow us, silent and unyielding, for as long as we remained under the same sky. Weeks slipped by, yet the night in the tent remained etched in me with the sharpness of a wound that refused to heal. Life in camp resumed with mechanical precision, alarms at dawn, drills in the heat, reports filed, and inspections endured. On the surface, I was Daniel Brooks, another young soldier carrying out his duties with obedience. Beneath that veneer, however, my thoughts spun endlessly around Captain Hayes. He carried himself as though nothing had happened. Orders rang from his voice with the same confidence, his authority unshaken. But I noticed the smallest fractures. When his gaze brushed over me during roll call, it lingered a fraction too long before moving on. When he corrected my stance, his hand hesitated in the air as if weighing the risk of touch. These fleeting betrayals of composure were invisible to others, but to me, they were proof that he still carried the same burden. Every night, lying in my cot, I replayed our brief encounter. Not as a fantasy anymore, but as a question. What did it mean to him? To me, it had cracked something open, an awakening that both thrilled and terrified me. To him, was it nothing more than weakness in a moment of loneliness? Or was it a truth he dared not admit, not even to himself? The secrecy bound us together in ways I hadn't expected. Each word exchanged in public carried a double meaning. When he said, "Good work, Brooks," after training, I heard more than praise. I heard the memory of his whisper, the weight of his hand. When he ordered me to fall in line, I felt the contrast between his public authority and the private vulnerability I had glimpsed, yet silence was its own punishment. We never spoke of the night, never hinted at it, and yet it stood between us like a wall neither of us dared to scale again. The harder I tried to bury it, the sharper it cut into me. Guilt tangled with desire, forming a knot that tightened with every passing day. One evening, after a long march back from patrol, exhaustion pushed the soldiers into a restless sleep almost immediately. I lingered outside my tent, staring at the horizon where the last embers of daylight burned out. I sensed him before I saw him, Captain Hayes approaching with measured steps. He didn't stop when he reached me, he only said, "Walk with me." We moved in silence away from the cluster of tents, the desert air cool and thin. At last, when no ears could overhear, he spoke. "Daniel, I need you to understand something. What happened, it was a mistake." His tone was firm, but underneath I caught a tremor that I bit back the instinct to argue. Instead, I said quietly, "If it was only a mistake, why do you still look at me the way you do?" The words caught him off guard. His jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the barren sand ahead. For a moment, I thought he would deny it outright. But instead, he exhaled slowly, as if surrendering to the truth he couldn't fully speak. "This life," he said, voice rough, "doesn't allow for what I feel. I have responsibilities. A wife. Soldiers who trust me. If I lose control, even once, everything unravels." I understood the weight he carried, but the ache in my chest didn't ease. "And yet," I whispered, "we both know it wasn't only weakness. It meant something." He turned to me then, eyes burning with conflict. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until he finally shook his head and stepped back. "This conversation never happened," he said, his voice snapping back to command. That we walked back separately, the unspoken truth hanging like smoke between us. That night, lying in the dark, I realized the silence wasn't just protection. It was a prison we had both built, one neither of us knew how to escape, and though the camp would march on, as disciplined and unyielding as ever, my heart now lived in two worlds, one of obedience, one of forbidden memory. I had no idea which world would break me first.